Today we're going to start talking about a new topic, civility and personal ethics. I'd like to get started by looking at a quote. Your beliefs become your thoughts become your words become your actions become your habits become your values, and your values become your destiny. I like this quote because it really demonstrates how our internal state of being eventually impacts everyone and everything around us. So today we're going to be talking about this idea of civility according to Forney. We'll also look at some information related to ethical communication and some steps that you can take in order to make the best possible decision when faced with an ethical dilemma. So why would the university require everyone to take a class on communication and public speaking? Shouldn't we all know how to communicate by this point in our lives? What is the difference between the ability to talk and the ability to communicate? Well, in my mind, talking is noise. True communication allows us to connect with others, and it allows us to develop and maintain relationships with the people and the things around us. So if you think about the readings that you completed in your Forney book, Choosing Civility, Forney begins by talking about how life is relational. We're constantly in relationship with the people and the things around us. Even though you're unaware of it, your body is communicating with the chair that you're sitting in. They have a relationship with one another. Now, that might sound a little bit crazy, but just hang with me. The shape and the material of the chair communicates its structure, and your body is conforming to that structure of the chair. So what happens if you don't acknowledge what the chair is trying to say? What would happen if you tried to treat your chair like a really big, comfy couch? Well, most likely, you wouldn't be very comfortable. You might even fall out of the chair if you tried to lay on it like a couch. You might be a little bit embarrassed, and you might even get hurt. Our relationships with people are kind of the same way. If we don't acknowledge the messages that we're receiving from others, chances are someone's going to be a little embarrassed. It might feel really awkward, and someone may even get hurt. Chances are that relationship simply isn't going to work. And so we're constantly in relationship with the people and the things in our environment, even if it's a very passive relationship, such as the one between your backside and your chair. So as humans, we all have this basic need to connect, and this is where civility fits in. Civility gives us the opportunity to connect successfully with others. Now, we all have a need to connect with others. That's something that's biological. As humans, we have a need to connect. But that ability to connect successfully is something that we learn over time and through a lot of practice. So again, that need to connect is biological, but that ability to connect successfully is something that we learn. So that's where civility fits in. Again, Forney would say that civility allows us to connect successfully with others. Now, chances are, if you've been in a social setting and you look across the room and you notice someone who's really attractive, most likely you're not going to say, "Oh, wow, he has really hot manners." But if that person that you're attracted to ends up having terrible manners on your first date, the odds of having a second date are pretty slim. So civility does matter. Let's talk a little bit about what we mean by civility. It's easy to automatically connect civility with manners, but it actually goes way beyond that. Civility begins with an awareness that there are people and things around us, and that our actions impact them. And then, along with that awareness, we build in this idea of empathy, this ability to think about how others feel or maybe feel in a similar situation. Empathy isn't enough, though. in the moment, we have to make an active choice about how we want to behave or communicate. I like the way Forney puts it. According to Forney, to be civil means to be constantly aware of others, while weaving restraint, respect, and consideration into the very fabric of this awareness. Now, on your way to class today, most likely you either held the door open for someone or had a door held open for you. Why? You might be thinking, well, it's the right thing to do. That means, I have good manners. That's how I was raised. And that's fine. But it's a little bit more complicated than that. In that moment, when you're walking through the door, you've got to be aware that there might be people around you or behind you. You've got to have empathy for what it would be like to have a door shut in your face. And then you actively choose how you're going to respond in that moment based on that information. And so civility operates on a daily basis in our moment-by-moment actions. And again, all action, all behavior is communication. Now, when it comes to rules of civility, Forney has his 25 rules. You have your own set of rules, whether they're written down or not. And what we see is that across time, every culture, every society or social group has some set of rules to guide the communication and the interaction of its members. And so sometimes you'll find rules in books on manners, religious texts, and so on. Even animal groups have rules related to who eats first, who hunts, who takes care of offspring, and so on. And so I want you to take a second and think about where your rules come from. Most of us will start out by developing rules based on the outside world. If you think about Kohlberg's stages of moral development, we'll choose to act in a certain way to avoid punishment. But then as we grow and mature, hopefully we choose to act ethically and act civilly because it's simply the right thing to do, because we've decided that's how we want to behave. Overall, though, our rules can often be organized by basic constructs such as gender, age, your culture or religion, even how much money you have or your socioeconomic status. So let's talk about some examples related to rules that would fall under these different constructs. Can you think of any rules related to gender, your gender? Everything from what you choose to wear on a daily basis to the way you communicate, and even something as simple as what bathroom you go to is based on your gender. Now again, gender and culture often closely intersect. So gender rules will vary from culture to culture. But if we think about stereotypical Western culture, we have rules such as men usually pay when we go out to dinner. Women tend to take small children to the bathroom. And in my family of origin, men take out the trash. Maybe that rule applies to your family and doesn't. Maybe it doesn't. But still, there are often several rules related to gender. We have lots of rules and laws related to age in our culture. You have to be 16 to drive, 18 to vote and purchase cigarettes or tobacco products. You have to be 21 to purchase alcohol, and so on. So we have lots of huge markers in our culture related to age. When it comes to rules related to our culture, you can think about everything again from dress. How you dress tends to be influenced by your culture. What you eat is strongly influenced by your culture. What did you have for breakfast? I had oatmeal, very stereotypical Western thing for breakfast. Some of you maybe had sushi, I don't know. But again, what we consider to be appropriate for various meals is very much tied to our culture or ethnicity. Our religion also impacts choices such as dress, food that we eat, how we practice a spiritual belief, where, what time of the week, how often during the week do you practice that spiritual tradition. All of those things are rules or choices that are impacted by religion, that construct. Now, One set of rules that we tend to not like to talk about are rules related to socioeconomic status or how much money we have. Believe it or not, how much money you have impacts how you're treated and impacts your choices in the world. Everything from where you will shop, the kind of car that you will drive, how you're treated when you walk into certain stores, what schools you would even consider going to. All of this is impacted by socioeconomic status. Even access to certain types of support, either financial or medical support, is impacted by your socioeconomic status. There are rules related to that. Now, our rules can be formal or informal, written or unwritten, and they can be internal or external. Your rules for yourself versus actual written laws of the land. Now, the interesting thing is that sometimes the informal rules can have a greater impact on our behavior versus the actual written rules. So, for example, how many of you have broken the speed limit lately? Occasionally, I do too. But that's a written rule. Even though it's a written rule, there are signs posted, we still choose to break that speed limit. But have any of you decided to dress in a way that is actually opposite to your gender? Probably not. I don't think that's written down anywhere, but yet we don't see a lot of men running around in skirts. So again, sometimes those unwritten rules can have more impact versus the actual laws of the land. Now, our rules can be healthy or unhealthy. They can either support growth and change, or they can inhibit growth and change. And that applies specifically to our family groups and our close relationships. Now, when it comes to communicating ethically, we do have some principles set forth by Nair and Sandin related to how we can keep our communication ethical. What I want you to really recognize is that anytime you're communicating with someone, not only are you demonstrating your ideas of civility, you're also demonstrating your ideas of right and wrong, or your personal code of ethics. We're going to look at this from a couple of different angles. So when you're wanting to make sure that you're communicating ethically, I want you to keep in mind Buber's I-thou versus I-it stance. Now, Buber was a German philosopher, and he thinks that we can approach the world in one of two ways, either using that I-thou or I-it stance. With the I-thou stance, we approach people, we communicate with people in a way that recognizes their value, that recognizes them as being wholly human and unique beings. We avoid stereotyping, or we avoid categorizing people. When you're using that I-thou stance, your goal is to understand the other person fully. It's not about your agenda. It's not about what you are trying to get out of the conversation. Again, it's all about understanding that person. Now, in its pure, true form, this I-thou stance is pretty rare. You may have experienced this in some of your close or intimate relationships, but it takes a lot of energy to really meet this level of communication. Now, the other end of the spectrum is the I-it stance. And this is when we simply communicate with people as if they're objects. I hate to say this, but in our culture, we use people a lot. We tend to fall into this I-it stance frequently. And with this I-it stance, we're pushing our agenda. We're focusing on our needs to the extent of ignoring the needs and ignoring the value of the person we're communicating with. So the next time you go and order a cup of coffee at Starbucks, think about how you communicate with the person behind the counter. Do you say hi, or do you just ramble off your order without even making eye contact? Are you treating the person as a person, or are you treating them kind of like an ATM machine where you just want to get your coffee and get out? Now, this link will take you to a video that I hope you'll get to watch in your discussion section. If not, take the time to watch it on your own. And you'll see some interesting examples of this I, thou, I, it stance. And I want you to think about what you would do in that scenario as well. Again, anytime we enter into a conversation with someone, we're demonstrating our ideas related to civility, and we're demonstrating our ideas about right and wrong. This idea of ethics, or how we define right and wrong, goes way beyond just the huge moral dilemmas that we might encounter. It's actually an everyday, moment by moment action. So I do have a formal definition of ethics that I want you to be familiar with. Ethics are the rules or standards governing the conduct of a person, or essentially the agreed upon standards of right and wrong. Now, sometimes when we think about the word ethics or ethical codes, we relate that to a specific professional group. Now, it's true that many of the professional groups have their own set of ethics or ethical guidelines or ethical standards that must be followed. But as individuals, we also have an ethical code. Even if it's not written down, there's something within you that helps you decide right from wrong. Now, when it comes to this relationship between ethics and civility, we often see that our rules of civility are a direct representation of our ideas of right and wrong. Our rules of civility are essentially that behavioral expression of our virtues or our ethical beliefs. So think back to that video. And what would you do in that situation? On a day-to-day basis, we often fail to recognize the moral intensity of a situation. And by moral intensity, we simply are referring to the degree to which others will be affected by our actions or decisions. We need to be wearing our ethical thinking caps all the time, even if it's something as simple as talking with a classmate. Are you taking the time to be truthful? Are you taking the time to be an active listener? Or are you just nodding your head, hoping that they'll shut up really soon? Right? Most of us will try to demonstrate certain characteristics or virtues on a day-to-day basis when we think about it. But the problem is, again, we fail to see the moral intensity of a situation, and nobody's perfect. So throughout history, people have written about virtues that we as humans should try to embody. But I think it was even Benjamin Franklin who couldn't live up to his own list of virtues. So we will make mistakes in our communication. There will be times when we're hurtful to others. But that doesn't mean that it's not important to try to uphold our ethical values in every conversation, even the simple ones. When it comes to defining right from wrong, there are lots of different ways that we can look at various situations. And so this is just a quick example of ways that we have tried to define right from wrong over time. Here you have everything from cultural relativism, wherever good is defined as whatever is socially approved. This is kind of like the classic do as the Romans do type of philosophy. And all the way down, you can compare that to egoism, where whatever is good or right is essentially whatever I want. Now, I would love to be able to say that every day, every moment, my actions are guided by my beliefs in a higher power. I wish I could do that. But again, sometimes I get really selfish, and sometimes I really look like an egoist, even though I do ascribe to beliefs related to my higher power. So it's common that even though we might have one system of defining right and wrong, if we're not being mindful, if we're not putting energy and really thinking about all situations from that ethical perspective, that we'll fall into a system of right and wrong that makes us not very proud. And so what we have to realize is that at any given point in time, we're constantly operating under several different layers of rules. We have rules related to even being on the planet Earth. We all have to abide by the laws of gravity, whether we like it or not. Then we have rules related to being in the United States, to being in the state of Texas, Lubbock County, the city of Lubbock, and even rules related to being on the Texas Tech campus. Then, even on the Texas Tech campus, we have different layers of rules based on who you are. Are you faculty? Are you student? Are you staff? Are you a visitor? Even things like where you park are greatly impacted by what social group you're a part of. So the interesting thing is that sometimes these layers of rules can conflict. And even sometimes we'll have a conflict between different values that we're trying to uphold. Now, when you're forced to choose between two values or two beliefs that are important to you, this is often referred to as a defining moment. Chances are many of you have already experienced a defining moment, whether it's trying to decide what school to attend or whether or not to go to a college that all of your friends are going to, or do you strike out on your own? Maybe you've had to make some really tough decisions about a relationship or an unexpected pregnancy. If you don't think you've experienced a defining moment yet, don't worry. Life will bring you several. And in those defining moments, we have to really be mindful of who we're striving to be, what values do I want to represent in this moment. Sometimes it's useful to use what's referred to as the rule of two. What's going to matter the most in 2 minutes, 2 hours, 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 years, and so on. And when we look at situations from that perspective, sometimes the answer is a little bit easier to come by. There will be times when you have a conflict at work where your personal rules are conflicting with something that's happening in the workplace. Sometimes, too, we have conflicts in the workplace related to the ethical guidelines set forth for a profession and then the actual practice of what's happening in the workplace. In situations like that, we often have people who are labeled as whistleblowers who will speak out against these ethical wrongs, and they go to great lengths to uphold what is right or good in their mind. So let's talk a little bit about whistleblowers. Whistleblowers are an interesting group of people. There's actually an entire webpage devoted just to whistleblowers. And if you're thinking ahead to your third presentation, this is a potential topic you might want to discuss with your class. So whistleblowers have a unique set of characteristics. Usually whistleblowers are a little bit older and a little more financially secure than a general population. Now, this is important because whistleblowers tend to lose their job when they call attention to whatever is going wrong. Whistleblowers also tend to be part of a profession that is separate from their workplace. So what do I mean by that? A doctor, nurse, lawyer, and even a teacher have a separate set of licensures or credentialing boards that is separate from their actual workplace. So a physician is a physician no matter what hospital he or she may work with. So having that separate profession impacts whistleblowers in a couple of ways. First, it is a skill set that they can take to another facility. Also, with these types of careers, there's often a separate set of ethical codes that the person has to agree to uphold. So, for example, as a therapist, I, of course, have an ethical code that's related to being a faculty member on campus, but I also have an ethical code related to my licensure through the state of Texas and through my credentialing body, AAMFT. So if I'm working in a facility that is not upholding these ethical standards, I have to make a tough decision. Do I just keep going, sliding under the radar, or do I call attention to what's happening? Whistleblowers have a very strong sense of justice, and they will call attention to what's happening so that hopefully the right action or the right decision can be made in that workplace. I've got some example interviews for you here. These are all examples of whistleblowers. Now, if you go to the actual whistleblower webpage, you can find many, many more examples. The interesting thing is that people blow the whistle frequently, but it takes a pretty big story before it hits the newsstand. You may be familiar with some of these names, but I would recommend watching one. The Joseph Darby interview was really, really interesting because he literally had his life threatened. He lost everything. But at the end of his interview, he talks about how, yes, he would do it all again just because it was so important to him to uphold his idea of high moral values. So with all those different layers of rules, you might be thinking, is there anything universal? Is there anything that we can say, across the board is good or right? Well, when you look at different spiritual traditions, when you look at several different cultures, we can see versions of the golden rule, which I think is absolutely fascinating. So this idea of how we should treat other people the way that we would like to be treated, that basic concept can be found in many, many different cultures. Paula Tompkins writes about the platinum rule, which is essentially an interesting twist on the golden rule. And so the platinum rule simply says to do unto others as they wish to have done to themselves. So treat people the way they wish to be treated. And again, this is an interesting update on the golden rule. We are a very global society now. We can communicate with people who are literally on the other side of the world, and we have many, many different cultures that we will be interacting with. So this platinum rule allows us to take cultural differences into account, which I think is really important. I have a certain set of expectations for how I would like to be treated, but that might not be the same for one of my friends who comes from a very different culture. Even something as simple as a greeting, what is a proper greeting, is going to vary by culture. And so in order to follow that platinum rule, I have to take those differences into account. And again, that helps me make sure that I am communicating ethically with that unique person. And in that moment, I'm getting closer to that I-thou stance. I'm working to understand that person based on their frame of reference versus just using myself as a frame of reference. We also have writings such as the 5 ethical values of communication. You'll see writings like this not only for various disciplines, but different philosophers throughout time have, again, tried to identify virtues or values that we should uphold in our communication. Sometimes, though, to be ethical, just something as simple as the think principle will help. And the think principle simply asks us to think about what we're about to say or how we're about to communicate. Is it true? Is it helpful? Is it inspiring? Is it necessary? And is it kind? If not, then maybe we shouldn't say it. Now, just imagine how your day would be a little bit different if everyone would use that think principle. At the very least, our reality TV shows would be quite different. I think it would be an interesting experiment. So again, everyone will be faced with an ethical dilemma. You'll be faced with those defining moments throughout life. And when you are faced with a difficult decision, instead of just going on autopilot, if you will slow down and go through a process of deciding what to do, the outcome will be much better. So Tompkins writes a lot about how to make an ethical decision. And so we've kind of broken it down into 3 main steps, though, or condensed it into 3 primary steps. When you're faced with an ethical decision, the very first thing you should do is gather as much information as possible. Your decision will only be as good as your information. So take the time to really think about, what is the ethical dilemma? Why is this situation making my stomach hurt? What is the actual problem? How will I be impacted? How will other people be impacted in this situation? Think about the constraints for everybody involved. And then once you've gathered all of that information, think about all the different ways that you can resolve the problem. So identify all of those possible solutions, but then take an extra step and think about how those solutions will impact everybody that is involved, not just yourself, but everybody else as well. Then once you've chosen the best possible decision, follow through and reflect on whether or not you would do anything differently. This is a step that most of us don't bother to go through. We don't bother to think about what would I do differently if I had the chance. There's a great deal of learning that can happen if we will just take that time and reflect on the process. That will make future decisions a little bit easier. You can think about, did I uphold the values like I intended to? What would I need to do differently in order to be seen in the way in which I hope to be seen, or to communicate in a way that is truly ethical? So when we think about this idea of civility and our personal code of ethics, we really need to know what we think is right and wrong. We need to let that guide our every moment. Because again, every conversation we enter into is a reflection of our personal code of ethics. So it's worth it to know yourself. It's worth it to think about how you want to be seen by others. And I'm going to throw out one more final quote. Happiness is when what you think, what you say, and what you do are in harmony. So as you go throughout your day, you're going to have things that are irritating. You're going to have people that maybe rub you the wrong way. And I would just encourage you to be that difference that you hope to see. You have the power, you have the opportunity to impact your world. One moment of civility can make a difference in someone's day. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.